Strange Shadows, a Clark Ashton Smith podcast.
It is not remorse that maddens me, that drives me to the penning of this more than indiscreet narrative in the hope of finding a temporary distraction. I have felt no remorse for a crime to which justice itself impelled me. It is the damnable mystery, beyond all human reason or solution, upon which I have stumbled in the doing of this simple deed, in the mere execution of the justice whereof I speak. It is this that has brought me near insanity.
Greetings, pilgrims, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 21 of Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The voice you just heard was friend of the show, James Conrad, reading the opening to today's story, The Supernumerary Corpse. I am one of your hosts, Rob Poynton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yes, easy for you to say. I struggle with that. I was trying to tell Linda earlier what we were doing today, and I was like, the Supernumerary.
I've been practicing all morning.
Ah, nice. Yeah.
I was say, it sounds like a sort of accounting term, doesn't it? I find you've got a supernumerary, a factor in your accounts or something.
Indeed, it does, doesn't it? Like a system of accountancy, a filing system or something, like the Dewey Decimal.
Yeah, you use the supernumerary system, I see.
Yeah. I could believe that.
So this is one of Smith's, I suppose we'd just call this a straight-up horror or weird tale set in modern times, and a fairly short story as well.
Yeah, it's one of his, what he described as filler stories that he would send out to things, basically pay the bills. So
yeah, and I think consequently, there's the language is fairly toned down. But nonetheless, well, I found one or two words that I wasn't familiar with, and another couple that I do know, but just like the sound of. Yeah. So let's start with our favourite words, shall we?
Yeah, there was one that I hadn't got a clue about, so I had to look it up. That is usufruct.
I'm glad you said that and not me, sir, because I've been dreading that one.
Yeah, I've never heard that one before. But it's apparently the right to enjoy the use and advantages of another's property as long as you don't damage or sell it.
Ah, right. That kind of, that fits in with what happens in the story, doesn't it? I guess in the sense of, I suppose today what we call copyright or intellectual property, really.
Yeah.
My first choice is irremeable, which I was not really familiar with, and that means there's no possibility of return.
Yeah, I had to look that one up as well. Now, the next one I've chosen, I'm pretty sure we've had it on before, but I like it, so having it again. That's stertorous, which is noisy and laboured breathing.
Yes, very nice. I do like that one. One of those that I did know, but like the sound of, is cupidity, which of course means greed.
Yes.
Cupidity. It's a lovely sounding word.
It is. That's it for me. You've had the other ones I've chosen.
Oh, right. Well, there are actually a couple of others that I liked. Requisites, which we all know what a requisite is. It's a requirement or a necessity. And I think I like that because I think it reminds me of an old Monty Python sketch.
Yes.
Is it something about fishy or cheesy requisites?
Indeed.
Or something like that?
Yeah. I think it's a meaning of life in it or something. Or
it could be, yeah. Perhaps someone out there can let us know.
Or maybe the cheese shop sketch. I don't know. It's been a while since I watched Flying Circus, but I don't know.
Yeah. And the other one was perspicacity, which I always like the sound of as well, which means insight, of course.
Indeed. Right, should we have a look at the publication history for this? Now, apparently Smith thought of the idea way back in 1929. Now, for some reason, he wrote down a synopsis of it, basically a one-line synopsis, and then moved on and did various other things. He then talked about it in a letter to HPL in mid-November 1930, but that letter doesn't seem to be inexistent at the moment. We did have a look, but we can't seem to find it.
Yeah, not been able to track that one down yet, but we'll continue. We'll continue searching.
Now, he did nothing with it for another 2 years and finally wrote and completed it by the 10th of April 1932. As was often the case, he submitted it to Farnsworth Wright. And to his shock, it was accepted.
Oh my word!
Yeah. Which came as a surprise because Smith had quite a low opinion of the story and had written to HPL saying that it might be punk enough for Wright and that he didn't know if the carbon was worth circulating.
Wow.
So, yeah. It was published in the November 1932 issue of Weird Tales, which, incidentally, you're going to like this because I know it's one of your favourite stories. It was published in the same issue as the first part of the serialization of Worms of the Earth.
Oh, marvellous. Yes.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that. Yeah. Now, another indication of how Smith felt about the story can be gleaned from a letter to August Derleth, dated April the 16th, 1932, where Smith writes, "I haven't had any news from editors, barring a check from Gernsback, who still owes for 3 tales. Bates and Wright seem to have retired into the silence. The latter has held Mohan Los for nearly 3 weeks and now has a new short, The Supernumerary Corpse. He will probably buy it, since it doesn't devote much space to the creation of atmosphere."
Well, I think that's a fair comment, a fair assessment of the story.
Yeah, it's funny because it's at this time that all the letters are pretty much between Derleth and Smith are kind of dedicated to bitching about Farnsworth Wright's low opinion of his readers, because that was often the rebuttal, wasn't it? It was just like, oh, I don't think that they get it. It's too literary, blah, 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 blah. And so quite rightfully, Smith and Derleth are like, he really doesn't, he thinks his readers are idiots, doesn't he? Sort of thing.
It certainly did seem to. And I mean, it's the irony, isn't it, that what we'd call one of Smith's weaker stories, or as he said himself, a filler, is the one that instantly gets snapped up. City of the Singing Flame or something. No, I don't want that.
Yeah, I think that is quite telling, isn't it? Yeah. But obviously around this time, he was kind of limited because, what is it, Astounding Stories or whatever it was, that kind of shut down at this point. No, Strange Tales, sorry.
Strange Tales, Strange Tales, yeah.
The Clayton outfit, yeah.
So from the opening, we learn that we have a man who has committed a crime that he feels no remorse for. In fact, he feels quite justified in doing it. He feels, as we'll find out, a sense of aggrievement that, well, it really develops into sort of monomania, doesn't it, I think?
Yeah. It's very much just a grudge story, isn't it? A revenge story kind of thing with a twist, which is quite novel, actually. I quite like the take on it. It is very much a weird story.
Oh, yeah, totally. My motives in the killing of Jasper Trilt, though imperative, were far from extraordinary. He had wronged me enough in the course of a 12 years' acquaintance to warrant his death twice over. He had robbed me of the painfully garnered fruits of a lifetime of labour and research, had stolen with lying promises the chemical formulae that would have made me a wealthy man. Foolishly I had trusted him, believing that he would share with me the profits of my precious knowledge, from which he was to acquire riches and renown. So we've got this idea of this man's work being stolen by another person. And then, of course, we also find that he's married the woman that our protagonist had his eye on as well. Now, I don't know that either of this is justified, really, particularly.
Yeah.
I mean, Trilt does seem to be a bit of an a-hole when we meet him later on.
He does, doesn't he? Yeah.
So I'm not saying that killing him is justified. Maybe he's right to have a grievance here.
Oh, yeah. And being as this is one of the ones without the Baroque language, there is some brilliant turns of phrase later describing him, which we'll get to in due course. But some of it's almost Shakespearean in its sort of withering takedowns of this chap, wasn't it?
Yeah. That put me in mind a little bit of Theatre of Blood, Vincent Price.
Oh, yeah.
Was his name? Was it Lionheart? I think his name was in that. Yeah, again, that idea of dishing out justice, but in a very stylish and artistic fashion.
With a flair, with a flourish. With a flourish.
And let me get the mention of Norma Gresham. I thought these names were quite interesting. Jasper Trilt, that's one of Smith's quite odd names, isn't it?
Mm.
And then Norma Gresham sounds more conventional, I suppose. And I couldn't help wondering if Smith hadn't based these on real people. Like, it had that sort of feel of it to me.
It did a little bit, doesn't it? I was reminded of a T-shirt that PJ Blakey Novice from Red Cape Publishing has, which is amazing. It's basically it's a black T-shirt with white writing that says, "Be nice to me, or I'll put you in one of my novels." It does sound a little bit like the writer's revenge, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So we can only wonder, because we know Smith had several acquaintances, shall we put it like that? So perhaps something spurred him into this idea, or maybe, I don't know. So yeah, Norma Gresham, whom I had always loved in my halting, inarticulate fashion, and who had seemed to like me well enough before Trilt began to pay her his dashing and gallant addresses. She had speedily forgotten the timid, poverty-stricken chemist and married Trilt. This too I pretended to ignore, but I could not forget. So from the very start, he's doing this, putting this outward show on, but he's harbouring this deep resentment constantly.
Yeah. It's quite interesting that he set this in the world of chemistry, because apparently these kind of grudges and grievances are actually really commonplace in the scientific community. It's like you think the goth scene's bitchy. You haven't even seen scientists, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I have heard that. Yeah, there's feuds that go on for decades.
Oh yeah, that's it. They like elephants with memories, you know what I mean? It's just yeah.
Maybe it is that if you're sort of devoted to the pursuit of one particular aspect of science, it might be a cure for something or whatever it is. Does that make you the monomaniac, or are you a monomaniac going into that kind of thing? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Which is the cause, which is the effect?
Yeah, a bit like singers, right, and being divas.
Oi.
Of course, there are exceptions that prove the rule. And I like that he's almost this stereotypical sort of scientist, isn't he? Timid, poverty-stricken, but with this obviously very intelligent. And as we see, he develops this amazing drug.
Yeah.
So obviously a very capable chemist. And I like this line, how he rationalizes it, though, with this weird twist. As you see, my grievances were such as have actuated many others in the seeking of vengeance. They were in no sense unusual, and like everything else about the affair, they served by their very commonplaceness to throw into monstrous relief the abnormal and inexplicable outcome. So, yeah, the love triangle, it's one of the oldest stories in the book when it comes to revenge. That is normal enough. I like that he sort of normalizes killing a love rival, but the weirdness comes in how that happens and what happens after.
Yeah, I mean, I was struck by the fact that this is a very Victorian setup to me, because obviously I've mentioned before what they called inheritance powder and things like that. It was it actually happened a lot more than you'd think. There were some very famous cases. It was usually women doing away with love rivals using poison.
Oh, right.
Specifically things like strychnine and arsenic, and then later thallium, because thallium was harder to detect.
Right.
So there you go. So yeah, he'd probably read through a couple of Penny Dreadfuls or something about some of these cases. You know what I mean? And yeah, but it had that ring of Victorian revenge to me.
Yeah. I cannot remember when it was that I first conceived the idea of killing my betrayer. It has been so long an integral part of my mental equipment that I seem to have nurtured it from all pre-eternity. But the full maturing, the perfection of my murderous plans is a thing of quite recent date. Yeah, because we learn he's into toxicology, right?
Yeah. For years, apart from my usual work, I've been experimenting with poisons. I delved into the remote arcana and byways of toxicology. I learned all that chemistry could tell me on the subject, and more. I like that. The remote arcana and byways of toxicology. So yeah, like, the top shelf of toxicology.
So then you get into all your hemlocks and all that kind of stuff, and all the old legends and lore and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, it kind of recalls the affair of the poisons. The court of the Sun King. and all that.
Yes.
And that garden, I can't remember where it is, but that famous poison garden.
The poison garden,
yeah, here in the UK. I want to visit there at some point.
Might be in Cambridge, because Lara was talking about that. There's a botanical gardens in Cambridge.
Yeah,
I've got a feeling it might be part of that, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I need to visit there at some point, if only just to get my picture taken next to the gate, you know.
Does Linda know about this? And I like that he's kind of doing this as a side gig, right? He's doing his normal work, which presumably he's reporting to Trilt, and Trilt is taking full advantage of his findings and his discoveries in his normal business. But this is his little side hobby. All his spare time is spent in toxicology.
Yeah, it is really quite amusing when you think about it. I can just visualize the guy in his little lab coat with his little round spectacles, poring over these books of weeds and herbs and stuff like that, you know.
And he is very specific about what he's looking for as well, right? Mm. From the beginning, I had in mind certain peculiar requisites, which no poison familiar to science could fulfill. It was after endless groping and many failures that I succeeded in formulating a compound of rare toxic agents which would have the desired effect on the human system. Yes, well done for not giggling during groping.
I nearly did. Endless groping.
Is there any other type? So, yeah, it's kind of researching stuff to see what this does and what that does. But then it's almost like he has this particular idea in mind and is working towards creating something that, well, it's basically undetectable. It leaves no trace and should imitate closely the effects of some well-known malady. Mm-hmm. Oh, and also, quite disturbingly, the victim must not die too quickly. So he wants someone to suffer and know that they're dying at his hand, but it's not going to leave any trace. And it looks like they've had a heart attack or stroke or something like that.
Yeah, it's quite chilling, isn't it? However, the afflicted person, though seemingly insensible, would retain consciousness and would not die till the final absorption of the poison. Though utterly powerless to speak or move, he would still be able to hear and see, to understand and suffer. Mm. This isn't your standard crime of passion that you usually get over some kind of love rival or something like that. That's usually like a blow over the head or something. This is not just premeditated. This is, like you say, this is monomaniacal. This is
yeah. It's finely tuned, isn't it?
Oof. Yeah.
It's not enough just to kill him. He's got to suffer, and he's got to know why he's suffering and everything else.
He kind of recalls the case of Graham Young, the teacup poisoner in the 1970s.
Oh, I don't know that one.
Yeah, he was a serial killer. He poisoned 3 people up north somewhere by slipping. He'd been in prison for poisoning his auntie and killing her, and was then released. And they got him a work placement in a big factory, and he started experimenting on the staff there. He was the tea boy.
Oh my God.
And he put several in hospital, killed a couple. But he was noting, he had a meticulous notebooks of what dosage he was giving to each person and the effects and all this. And it reminds me of that case.
Yeah, so this is very scientific, you know. Yeah. And it's not really detailed or mentioned here, but I wonder how he came about by this. What was he testing it on? You know, because presumably there's testing going on. You don't like to think about that, do you, really? Which, you know, of course, up until, well, fairly recent times was standard practice, not just in medicine, but in cosmetics and all that kind of stuff as well.
Oh, yeah.
We're not far here from the Huntingdon Life Sciences place, which, of course, was regularly picketed, and quite rightly so, by people.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah, I actually know people who've picketed it.
Yeah. And the other thing this brought to mind was Poe, of course, with the idea of premature burial and premature interment, which obviously has cropped up in Smith before, not that far back.
Indeed. Yeah, then you get into tetrodotoxin as well, you know, the pufferfish poison.
Yeah. Even after I had perfected this agent and had satisfied myself of its efficacy, I delayed the crowning trial. It was not through fear or compunction that I waited. Rather, it was because I desired to prolong the delicious joys of anticipation. perspication. The feeling of power it gave me to know that I could sentence my betrayer to his doom and could execute the sentence at will. So although there's this sort of coldness in what we might call a very analytical approach to what he's doing, there's almost this lust as well, isn't there? He's going to savor this. He's going to enjoy every last minute of it.
Yeah, I think that's why it does give me flashbacks of all those medical serial killers like your Shipman, your Beverly Allitt, all these kind of people, Colin Norris, all them kind of people. It's got that kind of thing. He is deriving some kind of really sick pleasure out of this, isn't he?
Yeah, it's the power of life or death, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what it is, yeah.
So he needs to get Trill over to his place because he's decided now is the time to do this, or he talks about this all happened a fortnight ago, and he thinks the best way to do this is to arouse the cupidity of Trilt. So he hints to him that he's got a great discovery. He's on the brink of a great discovery. Doesn't really say anything about what it is. Basically, he's leaving breadcrumbs here, isn't he? Because he doesn't want to invite Trill over. He wants Trill to invite himself over just to really allay any suspicions that might fall on him after.
Basically playing to the man's avarice, isn't he?
And of course, he's got to do this at his place because I wished him to die in my presence and in the laboratory that had been the scene of my long defrauded toils. So there's that sort of poetic justice. He wants him to be in a place where he's done his best work that Trill has stolen or benefited from. And of course, he wants to be there when it happens. Well, he's got to be there. He's got to administer the dose in some way.
Yeah, and it's now we get into how. I prepared the draught that contained the poison, a chemist's glass of water coloured with a little grenadine, and set it aside in readiness among my tubes and bottles. So I like that. There's even thought of a way of disguising it using grenadine.
Yeah, it's been really cautious, isn't it? Because you could just put this out on the table and say, I'll have some of that. But it's really working to allay any suspicion at all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that Trill has no clue about this hatred that he has for him, although that could be because Trill is just a boorish oaf, possibly.
I couldn't help wondering if he may have been based on Edison.
Oh, right.
Because apparently most of Edison's discoveries were stolen. Like the light bulb and all that kind of stuff. That's apparently what he did. He would swoop in and nick people's things and then patent them. Yeah. So I wonder if Tilt is based on Edison.
Oh, it could be. Yeah. Was there a film made of that fairly recently? Was it Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yes. I think you're right. Yeah.
And I love it. We've got this lovely old laboratory, right, in an old and shabby mansion converted by Trilt to this purpose in a well-wooded outskirt of the town at no great distance from my employer's luxury home. So we've even got the Gothic mansion. Presumably there's thunder and lightning going on as he turns up. Yeah,
it's some pure Hammer horror, isn't it, though? You can visualize it. And this is where we get our first sort of, snipes at Trilt. Trilt was a gourmand, and I knew that he would not arrive till well after the dinner hour. He then goes on when he arrives. He came in, gross and odious, with the purple of overfeeding upon his puffy jowls. He wore an azure blue tie and a suit of pepper and salt, a close-fitting suit that merely emphasized the repulsive bulkiness of his figure.
He's not holding back, is he?
He's not, is he? No.
But again, this took me back to Theatre of Blood and the sequence. I think it was Robert Morley, who was the chef. I won't say what happens because spoiler alert, and also it's quite disturbing. But I thought in this role I could see Robert Morley playing that.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, film and literature has had a lot of these kind of characters. I mean, one of the more famous ones is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right?
Yes. Yeah. And this is where we learn our protagonist's name as well. It's Margrave, and his first name is Felton. Felton at Margrave. Again, an unusual name. Felton, I instantly think, Fenton. Of course, the dog.
Of course.
One of the best things ever to happen on the internet. Margrave sounded familiar as well. I couldn't quite work out why. So I looked it up, and the word Margrave means, or it was applied to, it was a medieval times, a military governor. So it was a person who was put in charge of a fortress on the borders of a territory. That was a Margrave, which I'd never heard in that context. But then the other thing, I realised where I did hear it from was in the first Jack Reacher novel, which was the recent Jack Reacher series, the Amazon series, the first one, was set in a town called Margrave, which is a fictional town in Georgia.
Oh, nice.
So I had heard it before.
Yeah. I remember it from Doctor Who. The story Castrovalva, which is the first Peter Davison story. There's a Margrave, but they pronounce it Margrave. But it's because it's a play on it, because it's a medieval town that he rocks up at with amnesia, and it's they call him Margrave, but that's kind of his name, but it's basically because he is a Margrave.
Yeah, so that ties in with that original meaning. Yeah,
exactly.
I don't know if Lee Child had any sense of that when he wrote that Reacher novel, or if he'd read this, but anyway, Margrave was the name he chose. Well, Margrave, what is it now? He asked. Have you finished the experiments you were hinting about so mysteriously? I hope you've really done something to earn your pay this time. So Margrave is getting paid. I suppose he's not probably getting paid that much. And Trill is, probably patenting these things and putting them out onto the market. I've made a tremendous discovery, I told him. Nothing less than the elixir of the alchemists, the draught of eternal life and energy. Elixir with a capital E. I like that as well. The elixir.
Yeah. You can just you can picture him, can't you? He was palpably startled and gave me a sharp, incredulous stare. You are lying, he said, or fooling yourself. Everyone knows and has known since the Dark Ages that the thing is a scientific impossibility.
That's interesting to me, a scientific impossibility, because how do you know? We can speculate that things are impossible scientifically. I guess you can say things are physically a scientific impossibility in some sense, but who knows what science is going to create in the future?
Yeah. Well, bumblebees is apparently...
Same to you, sir.
Well, bumblebees is supposed to be a physical impossibility for them to be able to fly, but they do, because the aerodynamics. They're not so, science would say, nah, I'll never be able to fly.
That's very true. Yeah. And I suppose if you think back, well, maybe not to this time, but you go back even 50 or 100 years before, the idea that people could communicate as we are now, or people could see moving images on a screen that they hold in the palm of their hand, would have been a scientific impossibility. I'm sure the Wright brothers came up against that, didn't they?
Oh, yeah.
And it's impossible for people to fly and all that sort of stuff. So then it kind of makes me wonder what Margrave is actually working on. If it's this real intelligent guy, what is he producing? I don't think that's ever really explained.
No, it's not.
But this obviously is going to be of big appeal to anyone, particularly a gourmand. The idea of eternal life and being able to gorge yourself forever and ever. And he kind of sets it up quite nicely. It's like I can almost see him just nudging that glass forward a bit, saying, yeah, well, it's in there. That's the stuff.
Yeah, because he asks, doesn't he? Have you tried it? He was like, yeah, it's fine.
It looks like grenadine, he remarked, with a certain perspicacity. I don't know if it's perspicacity to think that grenadine looks like grenadine. There is a superficial likeness. The colour is the same, but the stuff means immortality for anyone who dares to drink it. Also, and here we go, it means inexhaustible capacity for pleasure, a freedom from all satiety or weariness. It is everlasting life and joy. So, yeah, you can just gorge yourself and gorge yourself.
You got another withering takedown here. He gave me a somewhat contemptuous and doubtful glance. Well, you do look rather animated tonight, at least more so than usual, and not so much like a mackerel that's gotten soured on life. I like that. It's a great line.
That was great, wasn't
it? Yeah, face like a soured mackerel. I love that. That's brilliant.
Well, our saying back then was it was a face like a smacked arse. Yeah.
Smacked arse. Yeah.
I might start using that. Face like a soured mackerel.
Bulldog sucking piss off a thistle. That was another good one. Or licking piss off a nettle. Yeah.
Or chewing a wasp.
Chewing a wasp. Yeah. Oh, one of the best Macclesfield ones was a face like a welder's bench.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I like that. Yeah, if someone was not so good looking, then the expression for that was a face only a mother could love. So, not a very kind one. That
I came up with one years ago. A face like Jeffrey Dahmer's fridge.
That's put me off my tea. But I mean, apart from the description here from Margrave, which to be fair could be exaggerated, we've only got Margrave's word for that. Mm-hmm. We do, I think, here get some sense of what Trilt is about. Yeah, I'll try this myself. It should be a good commercial proposition if it does only a tenth of what you say. We'll call it Trilt's Elixir. So already is taking credit. The dollar signs are flashing up. yes, Trilt's Elixir. Try some.
Yeah, I love that. He's like, yeah, go for it. Trilt's Elixir.
He drained the glass at a gulp. Instantly, as I had calculated, the poison took effect. He staggered as if he had received a sudden crushing blow. The empty vessel fell from his fingers with a crash. His heavy legs seemed to collapse beneath him. He fell on the laboratory floor between the laden benches and tables and lay without stirring again. His face was flushed and congested, his breathing stertorous as in the malady whose effects I had chosen to simulate. His eyes were open, horribly open and glaring, but there was not even the least flicker of their lids. That's where he does his evil laugh, isn't it?
Yeah. Or, if this was a Hammer and it was Christopher Lee or one of them guys, he'd have made a, bottoms up line or something, Bottoms up, old chap.
And this is where his revenge really kicks in, because he knows that Trilt can still hear him. So now he explains everything that's going on and says, well, you're not going to die straight away. You're going to be suffering now for quite some time. Well, I think he gives him an hour, doesn't it? How do you measure that? How much suffering is enough? Seems like a random figure. An hour will do it.
But it sounds like he has actually thought about it. He's probably calculated it, hasn't he? Right, we'll give 5 minutes for this, 5 minutes for that.
Yeah. And Trilt eventually expires, but the terror still appeared to dwell dark and stagnant and nameless in his ever-open eyes. See, even in these kind of stories, we still get these nice phrases, don't we? Dark and stagnant and nameless.
Mm.
So now he's on to phase 2 of the plan. He's going to call Norma to say, oh, your husband's had some sort of seizure, and then he's going to call a doctor. He decides to call Norma first, and this is where things take a turn. Well, we go from murderers to full-on weird now. Norma answered the telephone herself, as I had expected. Before I could frame the few short words that would inform her of Trilt's death, she cried out in a shaken, tremulous voice, I was just going to call you, Felton. Jasper died a few minutes ago from an apoplectic stroke. It's all so terrible. I am stunned by the shock. He came into the house about an hour ago and dropped at my feet without saying a word. Ah, okay.
Yeah. I thought he'd gone to see you, but he could hardly have done that and got back so quickly. Come at once. So, yeah, he says, the dumbfoundment which I felt was inexpressible. It would be, wouldn't it? I mean...
Yes, yeah.
So now there's 2 corpses.
Yes, same person, 2 corpses, both died at the same time.
In exactly the same way.
In exactly the same way. So what does he do? He can't say, well, no, he's dead here because,
It'd give the game away, wouldn't it? No.
Yeah.
I like the fact his rational mind kicks in now. Either I or Norma was the victim of some strange and unaccountable delusion. So he's putting it down to madness.
Yeah. Perhaps he had some sort of weird dream or nightmare and he's just woken up or something like that. Yeah.
In inhaling his concoctions too deeply or something,
Just sniffing the Bunsen burner again. Half expecting that the gross cadaver would have vanished like an apparition, I turned from the telephone and saw it, supine and heavy, with stiffening limbs and features. I went over. I stooped above it and dug my fingers roughly into the flabby flesh to make sure that it was real. Then it is. Trilt's body is still there, the obese body, the sybaritic face and lips, as he describes them. Even when the guy's dead, he's still insulting him.
Yeah. So then he decides that it must be Norma then, who was demented or dreaming, or who had made some incredible mistake. I should go to the house at once and learn the true explanation. So yeah, that's precisely what he does. But beforehand, he locks up the lab, doesn't he? He doesn't want anybody wandering in.
Yes, just in case, because you never know.
Yeah,
that puts an interesting thing up, doesn't it? If someone had found this body and called the police, and then there's the other body, you know, they're, again, like a lot of these stories, you can almost think of sequels to them and what ifs. It's quite nice, you know.
Oh yeah,
and I like this phrase in here again as well. I have no clear recollection of the short walk among shadowy trees and bushes and along the poorly lit streets with their scattered houses. My thoughts, as well as the external world, were a night-bound maze of baffling unreality and dubiety. Again, another nice little turn of phrase there.
Absolutely. Yeah, so he gets there and Norma's, as you would imagine, in a state, and explains that he must have felt ill and started back after he'd gone halfway to the lab. I didn't even hear him come in. I can't understand how he entered the house so quietly. I was sitting in the library reading when I happened to look up just in time to see him cross the room and fall senseless at my feet. He never spoke or moved after that.
So we get this strange thing here because it sounds like Trilt left to go to the laboratory.
Yeah.
So did he arrive there? Why, if not, why did he come back? It seems that he came back before he arrived because she says he must have started back after he had gone halfway.
Yeah.
So the timing of it suggests that he didn't actually turn up, but something did.
Yeah. Well, this is something I wanted to mention, that this is very much a lot of the tropes of the weird tale, that nothing is explained.
Oh, absolutely nothing is explained. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that. You don't need to go into explanations about it.
So Felton is led into the library. I do not know what I had expected to find, but certainly no sane man, no modern scientist and chemist could have dreamed of what I saw. The body of Jasper Trilt reposing still and stiff and cadaverous on the sofa. The same corpse to all outward seeming which I had left behind me in the laboratory. And this is where the doctor turns up and sort of goes, yeah, he's dead.
Yeah, I like that. He greeted me with a slight nod and a cursory, incurious glance. There's nothing whatever to be done. It's all over.
I reckon he's got his dinner in the oven. He wants to get back home to his dinner, right? Yeah, he's dead. Yeah, there we go. Sign his certificate.
Or he was in the pub down the road and he's got half a pint sitting on the bar, you know.
And I like this as well. I went over to the sofa and examined the body, touching it several times to make sure of its substantiality. The puffy purplish features, the open glaring eyes with the glacial terror, the suit of pepper and salt, the azure blue tie, all were identical with those I'd seen and touched a few minutes previous in another place. So there's no other conclusion other than there are two corpses of Jasper Trilt. But then it gets even weirder, right? And again, I like this with Smith particularly. We start with monomania and murder, then we go weird, and now we go weirder still.
Yes, absolutely.
Weird and weirderer.
Weird and weirderer. Nice.
Because this was a week ago. So what has he done with Jasper 1? Let's call him Jasper 1. Jasper 2 is obviously going to be put in a box and there'll be a funeral.
Yep.
Jasper 1, he drags into a dusty little used storeroom among cobwebby cartons and boxes and covers it with sacking. He basically just stashes his corpse in the corner.
Yeah, but first he goes through a lot of tests on it. So Ever the scientist, all possible tests. It was solid, clammy, gross material. So you can just imagine it, can't you, there with the forceps and God knows what else, poking and prodding and all this.
Later, I attended the funeral of Trilt. I saw him in his coffin, and as one of the pallbearers, I helped to carry the coffin and lower it into the grave. I can swear that it was tenanted by an actual body, and on the faces of the morticians and my fellow pallbearers, there was no shadow of doubt or misgiving as to the identity and reality of the corpse. But of course, when he goes back home and lifts the sacking, there's the cadaver, or I like he calls it, car, doppelganger, or phantom.
Yes.
So it's trying to come up with explanations now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was a nice observation, because I've actually been a pallbearer at a funeral, and yeah, you can definitely tell if there's something in the box.
Yes.
So that's quite a nice little observation. That
I like the idea as well of car is from the Egyptian, obviously doppelganger, the German, the idea that everyone has a double. But this goes beyond a double, doesn't it? I mean, you might see someone who looks like someone who could maybe pass for them, but this obviously isn't that, because both of them are Trilt.
Yeah.
So I can understand is groping, to use that word again. It's groping for some sort of thread of reality to cling on to, isn't it?
Yeah, not the sort of things I usually grope, but yeah.
Or behave. And this does send him a bit doolally, right? We get the... I think he's been doing okay up to now. He's made all his sand rolls, but he fails this one.
Yeah.
Madness took me then for a while, and I knew not what I did. Recovering my senses in a measure, I poured gallon after gallon of corrosive acids into a great tub, and in the tub I placed the thing that had been Jasper Trilt. But neither the clothing nor the body was affected in any degree by the mordant acid. Oh, there's a word I've got to mention, mordant. That's a good word, isn't it? Biting.
Yeah, we have mentioned that one before, a mordant worm.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes. Yes. Feasty feast. But not in this case. The worms are getting their supper on Trilt 2, but Trilt 1 remains... if you decompose, I suppose you remain composed, don't you?
Yeah. No sign of normal decay, remaining eternally and inexplicably the same. So he decides that I can't dissolve it in acid, burning probably won't work. I'll bury it in the woods behind the lab. So, and the earth will receive Trilt for the second time, which I thought was a nice little line.
That's cool. Oh, yeah. And in a way, I mean, this is great because there's no detection available here. He wasn't even around when Trilt died. Trilt dropped dead of this stroke or heart attack. He was buried. So even if someone found this other corpse, how does that play out in law?
It'd probably be done for grave robbing. But then they dig up the other one.
And it's still, yeah.
There'd still be another one. Yeah,
so there's another sequel, right? You know,
yeah,
there's another
absolutely.
interesting thing. Yeah, there's a cult detective kind of story, perhaps.
Oh, yeah.
The Case of Jasper Trilt.
Yeah. Yeah, Karnaki or something. No,
yeah. Facts in the Case of Jasper Trilt.
Oh, nice.
But then we do get this as well. After that, my crime will be doubly indetectable if I have really committed a crime and have not dreamed it all or become the victim of some hallucinative brain disease. So there still is that element of doubt because, again, this is unreliable narrator territory. We only have his word for it that all this happened.
Yeah. Maybe it is all a fever dream because you've been fixated on the murder. Maybe it's all in his head and he didn't, and the guy just dropped dead.
Total coincidence, possibly.
There you go. Yeah.
Or was this some kind of voodoo where his malignance reached out and caused this in some way? You know, the power of his will.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of different directions you could go with it for a sequel, isn't there? You know, you could go fully down the supernatural route and, you know, if you wanted, or you could go down that kind of route, the psychological, you know, the Silent Hill kind of route.
Yeah. And you can almost end this up like Telltale Heart, you know, I hear the beating of his hideous heart. This is, but I killed him, I tell you, I killed him, as the door clangs, you know.
Yeah, because it is quite Poe-esque again, isn't it? This is another one of Smith's Poe kind of tales.
Well, yeah, the revenge, Montresor and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which again was being entombed alive and a lingering death where you know why and what has been done to you.
Yeah.
But then I do like this. I have no explanation for what has happened, nor do I believe that any such can be afforded by the laws of a sane universe. Okay, so far so rational. But is there any proof that the universe itself is sane or subject to rational laws? I think at the moment we both say no to that.
Yeah, absolutely not. Well, I think we're both convinced that Nyarlathotep's assumed control at some point. Well, you said it best. It was when they switched on the Hadron Collider, right?
Absolutely. There was a little sideways shift there, I think, and yeah.
Yeah. I'm expecting the crawling chaos to emerge from someone and devour the world.
The top of Trump Tower or something.
Yeah.
The three-lobed burning eye. Perhaps there are inconceivable lunacies in chemistry itself and drugs whose action is a breach of all physical logic. The poison that I administered to Trilt was an unknown quantity, apart from its deadliness, and I cannot be wholly sure of its properties, of its possible effect on the atoms of the human body and the atoms of the soul. Indeed, I can be sure of nothing except that I too, like the laws of matter, must go altogether mad in a little while. So this is long-term sand loss now.
Yeah.
For the rest of his life, a gradual descent into full madness.
Yeah, these last couple of paragraphs are very Lovecraftian in the way they're written.
Yes.
They're very, very similar to a lot of the climaxes of HPL's stories, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
I fear that I must go mad. I must lose my sanity. Let me tell you what happened.
I write this now as I gibber in a corner, kind of thing. Yeah.
Now I'm going to put a gun to my head and all that kind of stuff. And that.
Yeah.
Well, I like that rationality that this poison that he made, this chemical, possibly that's had some effect on the body, which prevents decomposition. So there's a kind of rational thought there, but that goes no way to explaining why there's two of them.
No.
And we missed the band name there, Atoms of the Soul.
Yes, that's a good one. Yeah. Atoms of the Soul. That'd be space rock, right?
I think so. Yeah. Hawkwindy.
Hawkwindy. Yeah. It has to be, doesn't it? That's an interesting one you could ponder over. Does a soul have atoms?
Yeah, I was thinking that because you think of a soul as being non-corporeal.
Yeah.
And a thing made of what? Energy?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know.
Ethereal kind of thing.
Yeah. Because he mentions Ka earlier as well, which is that idea of...
Indeed.
I think, did the Egyptians think you had like three souls or something like that, with the three parts to the soul? One part was judged and...
the feather of Ma and all that.
Yeah. So, then could a chemical substance have an effect on your soul? So is what he has invented here, does it go beyond just the physical effect and into the realms of the soul, you know?
Yeah.
And is that a byproduct of his malignancy going into it, almost like a sort of magical potion or a magical brew?
Yeah, there's a lot of implications. You could chew this one over, considering it is, like Smith describes it, as a filler. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
That's not explicitly talked about. There's a lot of things. Yeah. I like it. I think it's a good little story.
Well, I think at first I was disappointed a bit by the ending, and is that it? And there's no explanation. It's a bit of an easy way to end a story. It's a bit like woke up and it was all a dream kind of thing. But now, having talked about it like that, now I'm thinking. So again, this is the interesting thing with Smith and with the great pulp writers in general, as we said before. They're writing pulp fiction. Read it during your lunch break, leave it on the train on your way home.
Yeah.
Yet within that, we often find all these little paths we can travel down and all these speculations that can really get quite deep sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
Not to mention the odd portion of filth as well, of course. But
of course. Yeah. Groping. Righty-ho then, that's the Supernumerary Corpse. Did you find anything in Dawnwood Spire Lonely Hill?
There's a couple of very short mentions. There's one, you mentioned that punk word. I'll just read that one out again. Of course, so I can read the return of dress. This is 15th of April 1932, and this is from Smith to Lovecraft. Crater of Tycho at the hour of the nameless cosmic echo that returns annually. Dear H. Pi L. I note that one of Belknap's tales in the lair of the space monsters is announced for the next issue of Strange Tales. A holding of 6 weeks or more is practical certainty of purchase with Clayton. Wright is still keeping the letter from Mohan Loss, and I have now sent him a new short, The Supernumerary Corpse. The latter may be punk enough for him to buy. A man dies and leaves 2 apparently solid and substantial bodies, but I guess I have outlined the idea to you in a formal letter. I can't make my mind up that the carbon is worth circulating. So yeah, as you said earlier, he didn't have a high opinion of it, and there's that mention there of the outline in a formal letter, which we're not been able to find at the moment.
Yeah, no, I'm assuming that letter is lost because in the editions that we're going from, the old Nightshade editions, it mentions a letter mid-November, but it doesn't give a date, and there's no citation where there is on anything that you can find, basically. So I'm assuming it's one of those letters that's sadly lost to the ether.
Yeah, it could be that HPL mentioned it in a letter, thanks for your letter, blah, blah, blah sort of thing, but we don't have so we've got references to it, but not the actual thing. We do get a response from Lovecraft. This is the 6th of May, 1932. Slope of forgotten Gnahagosh in the Great White South. Day of the reopening of the gates from dimension...
Right, okay.
That is not actually... There's a funny little symbol here.
Non-Euclidean language, I like it.
It's not even letters, so I'm going to pronounce that. Dear Clark Ashton, Wright was an ass to return Mohan Loss, which obviously was one of Wright's rejections, but he may take it someday. Glad the supernumerary has landed, and was pleased to see a Vusel in print this month. You're lucky to land anything with Bates just now, for, as I suppose you've heard, the Claytons are going in for drastic retrenchment. Strange Tales are quarterly, and Astounding are bi-monthly. After all, I guess old Satrap Pharnabazus remains our best bet as a steady market. So, yeah, I'm guessing they were publishing Strange Tales and Astounding less often.
Yeah.
Obviously losing money. So Weird Tales, for all of Pharnabazus's foibles, was at least reliable and a steady publication.
Yeah. I like the fact that he's one of the few of the people mentioned in these letters that has more than one nickname. There's several for Wright, isn't there? Because I think there's at least a couple of them in the battle that ended the century. So,
I have to say that is one of my favourites, Satrap Pharnabazus.
It's a good one, isn't it? Yeah.
And I believe you got another mention as well.
Indeed, yeah. As I like to do when things are printed in Weird Tales, because you can actually find them on the Internet Archive, I had a look in the issues afterwards, and this is from the January issue of Weird Tales. And it doesn't mention the story in particular, but it's talking about the November issue. So, but I just thought this was such a nice little letter. You're going to like this, because it's the most Smithian letter I've ever seen in the Erie that isn't written by Clark Ashton Smith himself. It comes from Robert Nelson in Chicago. May my pen act as a reed to pipe my most culminant eulogiums to Clark Ashton Smith, that master painter of weird literature. His tales appearing in Weird Tales have been impeccable gems.
Oh, that is very nice, isn't it?
Isn't it?
I like that painter as well. Painting with words. That's very apt, very accurate.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant. And yeah, he just goes. He carries on to say that one of his favourites was Averoyne, and he likes the Averoyne stories, that kind of thing. And then he also goes on to praise Robert E. Howard's Worms. So.
Yeah. Nice.
Man of good taste was Robert Nelson from Chicago.
Yes, Robert Nelson, we salute you. Yes, that was a victory for him, that letter, wasn't it? So there we are. That's the Supernumerary Corpse. Do let us know your thoughts, dear listener. Speaking of communications from listeners, we've got some letters in the mailbag, I believe, sir.
Indeed, we do. Yeah, the first one is from regular contributor A.T. Johnson. I read the relevant poems in my Arkham House selected poems by Smith. Now trying to read the letters of all these hippocampus collections in chronological order. Wow, that's a big task, because I believe there's a lot more than we have. I've read almost all of Smith's tales, but I've had some difficulty with his verse. These letters are a great help, and I'm warming to more and more of his poetical works. The comedy between him and Sterling often has me literally laughing out loud. And there are many hints that could lead to creepy stories about the infamous, and some say insidious, Bohemian Club. Please continue to do specials on poetry. Maybe even switch to a whole treatment of the poems after the tales are all covered? ? Truly, a curated selection of the letters would be extremely worthy too. Anyway, very much looking forward to some upcoming stories, especially the Varthek episode and the White Sibyl.
Thank you, AT. Yeah, I think, well, we're definitely on track to do more of the poetry in bonus episodes. And maybe in the future, that's something we'll look at once we've worked through all of the volumes of short stories. I think in a sense with the poems, we find that you get that in-depth analysis because you have to be very succinct in writing poetry. So you have to layer meaning in, perhaps a few lines. Whereas in a story, you can write 2 paragraphs describing something.
Yeah, which is what I can't do poetry. It's like drabbles and things like that. As I said to you before, when we like people saying, "Oh, I've sold a 1,000-word story," I'm still setting the scene. I'm still talking about somebody answering the door.
Yeah. Well, just as a little sidebar, I've got 2 examples of that recently. I'm going to be doing a review up on my Dragon's Teeth YouTube channel shortly about some of the mythos books I've been reading lately, 3 in particular. One is an anthology of stories about the Necronomicon, and there are a couple of stories in there that are 1.5 pages, 2 pages, and they are stories. And for me, they don't work at all. However, I've recently got Simon Bleaken's new book, and that opens with a 1.5 page story, but it's not a story. It's more like a prose poem.
Right, yeah.
An atmosphere piece.
Yeah.
A very good one and very poignant. So that for me works fine. It's not so much the length as the quality.
Yeah, no. Oh, here we go.
We can't help ourselves.
He's going to mention girth in 3, 2.
From the moon of girth.
Nice.
Everyone can write something short because you just write less and not much happens and you think, what was that about?
Yeah, of course.
It takes a skilled writer, of which Simon very much is, to pack that, 500 words or whatever with real depth and meaning.
Yeah. I found W.H. Pugmire was quite good at that as
Absolutely.
well. But again, all of his really short ones tended to be more prose poems or, like Smith himself, I guess.
Yeah, so SAT definitely will be continuing with the poems. It would be nice to look more at some of the letters as well. And I think, again, once we've done all the stories, we'll have pretty much worked through Dawnwood Spire. So we'll be pulling in from other sources as well, I suspect.
Yeah, I actually want to delve more into Born Under Saturn, the letters with Samuel Loveman and things like that. I do want to get more into those because I tend to stick more to eccentric and practical devils. So again, by the time we've got to the end of it, we'll have gone through a lot of the Derleth letters.
One issue that we do have with that, because I know we're both in a similar state of pecuniary depletion, is you often have to get these books from the small publishers direct.
Yeah.
You can't get them on Amazon. So sometimes you're looking at 40, 50 quid a pop by the time you pay your postage, So.
Yeah, which is only going to get worse at the moment, isn't it? The postage and things like that. It's
Yes. That's a backhanded plea for more patronage and subscribers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Speaking of wonderful patrons and subscribers, our next message is from Niels Hedgelin, our Auburn correspondent. This is referring to the plutonian drug, which we recently covered. So the master used a diminution ray. Your discussion of multidimensional beings reminded me of Edwin Abbott's 1884 novel Flatland, that has characters of 1, 2, and 3 dimensional shapes. Loved Anubis Gates. For favourite time travel movie, I'd say Primer because of its low budget simplicity, but still mind-bendingly accurate. But for the layman, Looper.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Niels. We've referenced Flatlands before, haven't we? I think we've spoken about that when we talked about that concept. And I keep forgetting it was written in 1884.
Well, it's basically a satire on Victorian society, isn't it?
Mm. And Anubis Gates was the book I referenced, the Tim Powers time travel book. Yeah, excellent book. And there's a book crying out to be made into a film. That would make an excellent film, I think.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Primer. Something I'm going to have to look up.
No, I wasn't sure I'd seen that before. Looper, definitely.
Yes.
That's the Bruce Willis one, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Next up, we have a message from Heather Miller. King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King, Chef's Kiss. Oh, yes. Absolutely tremendous album. Also, another interesting Many Worlds film is Run, Lower, Run. Are you familiar with that one?
No, not at all. Didn't recognise the name even. So, yeah, I'll be looking that one up as well.
I think I have seen the name, but I've never seen it. So that's another one I'm going to scribble down now.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Heather. Yeah, this is a great thing with this. We start getting ideas. I don't know. Are you the same? We've got Netflix and Amazon and blah blah blah, and I spend an hour looking for a film to watch.
Yes. Oh, all the time. Yeah. It's almost like too much choice, isn't it? It's things were simpler when you just went down the video shop.
Well, you say that, but I don't know if you ever remember that sketch in League of Gentlemen where they're in the video shop. Seen it.
Oh, yeah.
Seen it.
Yeah.
Oh, what's this one? Bradley Pitt. No, too much acting. Seen it. So I think it was just the same back then, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it's nice to get those recommendations. So thanks for that to Niels and Heather.
Yeah. I used to have a system in Bond Street Video in Mac, which was a huge video shop. It was bigger than like Blockbusters and things like that. It was enormous back in the 80s and early 90s. And I always straight through the big main hall into the back room, because the back room was where they had all the horror and the porn
and the filth. Yes.
Yeah. So I had a system. I'd start at one end of the room, work my way along the shelves.
I'd like to think that you went through one of those plastic strip curtains.
They did. No, they had beads. They had one of those bead ones. The beads, yeah, to stop kiddies. Because obviously, if you poke through your head, these look like covers of women with their assets on display, so to speak.
Oh dear, I'm getting all nostalgic now.
I know. The filth corner in the video shop.
It's the same in the second-hand bookshops, right?
Oh,
it was always your romance and your westerns and all that at the front. Then, at the back,
horror and filth.
Yeah, Moorcock and and then the weird fiction. Yeah,
what I like to call the cold print room, the Ramsey Campbell room. That's what it should always be known as.
There we are. Speaking of which, I think we should just mention we've got the 100th episode of the Innsmouth Book Club being released next Sunday as this goes out, so in 7 days' time. And we were delighted to have as a visitor and guest in Innsmouth, Mr. Ramsey Campbell itself. We had a wonderful chat with him that we just recorded yesterday. So do check that out when that comes out next week.
Indeed.
And we were talking about the Plutonian drug episode. Well, we had a message in from Mark Griffin as well, one of the presenters, of course, of the 30 Minutes Plus with H.P. Lovecraft podcast, who shall be joining us next time. We'll talk about that in a moment. But Mark writes, fossilized Migos. Good one there. I can see someone using a mortar and pestle to crush it up for a future snorting.
Why did you look at me?
Because I know how your mind works. And I mentioned the Michael Parry book, and Mark reminded me the book you're thinking of is Strange Ecstasies. Yes, that's the one.
Right.
Hunter S. Thompson appears in a few Lovecraftian fictions, even if he preferred Ernest Hemingway over the Providence author. Oh, I didn't know that. The short story Fear and Loathing in Innsmouth, Nixon's Revenge, by Jason Andrew, appeared in Whispers from the Abyss anthology. It's better in theory than execution. Damned Highway, Fear and Loathing in Arkham, a novel by Brian Keane and Nick Mamatas, is better.
That's the one I was thinking of. That I mentioned in the episode, and I couldn't remember who'd written it.
Right.
The Fear and Loathing in Arkham. It's that one.
Brian Keane's written a fair amount of stuff, hasn't he? That's the name I see around. Yeah.
Oh, hell of a lot. Yeah, hell of a lot. Yeah.
And Mark continues, the one weakness of the story is that much of the plot depends on coincidences to keep the action going. It could have been easily fixed by having Hunter take the fungi from Yoggoth's drug, fossilized Migos, and it is guiding him to these places. You might like them better because you like Banshee chapter better than me. Ted Levine played a great Hunter surrogate, but he needed to be in a better movie.
Oh, I disagree. I thought it was really good.
No?
Yeah,
I
really liked it.
I've still not watched it yet. That is on my list, actually.
No.
And Mark concludes, we interviewed one of Hunter's friends, Ron Whitehead, for our podcast. Hunter called him as crazy as 9 loons. If Hunter S. Thompson is calling you that, then that's quite an achievement.
I know the name. I read some stuff about Ron Whitehead. Yeah.
Right. And then Mark has given us a link to the show there. So of course I'll add that into the notes below. And of course you should be checking out the 30 Minutes Plus podcast anyway, because they've got some great episodes on there, some really interesting guests.
Yeah. And us a pair of idiots as well.
Yes, I believe they had 2 idiots from England on at one point.
Yeah, at one point or another.
Yeah, came on with some filth and bad puns and such like.
Yeah.
However, we shall be returning the favour on our next Strange Shadows episode because we're going to be covering one of my favourite Smith stories, The Colossus of Ilorn.
Yeah, it's basically a novella, isn't it? It's one of Smith's longer works.
Yep, it's an Averoigne story, and it's a very unique idea and one that has, it's spawned quite a lot of things, particularly in the Dungeons and Dragons world.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Mark and the guys will be joining us for that next time, I'm pleased to say.
Yeah, it should be a good one.
So, yes, we do hope you can join us for that. And as always, do keep your communications coming in. And if you would like to support the show and help us afford some of those weighty tomes,
yeah,
then please do check out our Patreon site where you can sign up. You get access to all our bonus content. You get a quarterly copy of Innsmouth News. And of course, you get free entry to the Innsmouth Literary Festival and any other events that we may be putting on in the future. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. It's a goodbye from me, Rob Poyton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.